Today's episode is brought to us by CS Instant Coffee, the best coffee for any adventure you're going to go on. Use the code ADVENTURE at csinstant.coffee and get 50% off through September and October. So give it a shot. And we're also brought to you by Roam Products. They make elastic knit, minimalist style wallets with all sorts of designs. Get 20% off the perfect minimalist wallet for all your adventures. It'll hold everything you need by going to wheredouroam, ROAM.com, and use the code podcast with a capital P at checkout.
And the earth just kind of came out from under me, just a slab avalanche. It was getting warmer out. And I just remember I was falling, and I remember that initial just falling feeling, and I grabbed the rope so fast and so tight, it burned a line right through my glove.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, trying to help you find adventure every day in any stage of life. You're going to hear from explorers, adventurers, business owners, and anyone living their life a little more out of the box than usual. Have you ever been in one of those moments where you thought you might not ever see your loved ones again? Well, today we're talking to someone who felt that. For a lot of us, it's not at the top of Mount Everest, but for Brian it was. I have been in moments myself where I felt that I might not make it out of this. A lot of them are adventure related, but honestly, a lot of them, vehicle related, traffic related. It doesn't have to be the top of Everest to feel this way. So just imagine that feeling times however much when you're so isolated up there and you know that there's such a slight chance for mistakes and for error. So enjoy this. I'm glad Brian made it out. He has written a book about it. Link for that is in the show notes. I encourage you to check it out and enjoy this epic tale of blind descent.
Welcome back to another episode of the Adventure Sports Podcast. This is Travis. So imagine the incredible effort it takes to reach the summit of Mount Everest at 29,035 feet. Now, imagine accomplishing your goal only to lose your sight once you've reached the top. This is what happened to Brian Dickinson on May 15th, 2011. He's with me today to fill us in on how this all came about. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you. So let's dig into your background a little bit and talk about how it is you ended up becoming a climber.
I don't know. I think it was just kind of the evolution of who I am. I grew up in Southern Oregon, so there's mountains there, but didn't really get into serious climbing until I guess in the early 2000s, because I was down in San Diego, living down there. I was stationed in the Navy, so I was jumping out of helicopters, as an air rescue swimmer. So I think I've always been wired a little differently, a little adventurous. But it wasn't until I moved up to the Pacific Northwest after getting out of the Navy. My wife and I moved up for grad school and just really started climbing in the Cascade Range out here. And, we got Mount Rainier and a bunch of volcanoes that are highly glaciated, and just really started upping my game. And one thing led to the other, and I decided I was going to climb the highest peaks on the 7 continents.
So the 7 summits, we'll get into that in a little bit. So you started out just kind of recreational climbing, but obviously one doesn't go from day hikes up the side of a hill to climbing Everest. What were the steps that you took to finally get to that point where you wanted to take on the challenge of something like the 7 summits?
I think I've always just kind of put goals out there to really challenge myself. And, I think when you actually, I don't know, as a climber, the 7 summits, it's a huge thing, and it's not something that you're going to do overnight. So when you actually consider doing it, I don't know. I think there's a lot of, just being naive early on, just, realizing Everest is out there, but you're going to lead up to it and just build that experience over time. And I think you said it right. I mean, it's a lot of steps getting there, like literally, but it just takes a lot of experience in training. And as soon as I, wrote that goal down, I mean, I took it serious, And I started taking the professional mountaineering courses and going up to Denali and, really hitting some of these really tough peaks and just ensuring that I could do Everest. And for me, I wasn't going to, go the guided route. I went independent. So I wanted to be sure that I was, guiding on other peaks and feeling very comfortable and just, capable of, maintaining life up there, no matter, what the situation, and really just training for the things that were within my control and, planning for the things that are outside of my control.
Right. So you said your wife climbed with you at the same time when you started out?
No, she's not a climber. Like she's went to Russia and went up to like base camp on Elbrus with me, and she and my kids have climbed the highest peak in Australia. But my wife, she didn't do like anything too major. She's scared of heights, and we're completely opposite.
Okay. Well, I asked that because I was wondering if she had that frame of reference to relate to what it is you went through up on Everest, which obviously we'll talk about in a little bit. But I wondered if she could kind of put that in perspective from her experiences, but it sounds like she's not gotten to that point herself.
No, far removed for sure.
So the question, why climb? Why do you do it? Obviously, it's inherently dangerous on these higher peaks that we're talking about. What's the draw to it?
I think for each climber and, people that don't climb, I mean, just whatever you do in life, I think you just answer things a little differently based on the person that you are. And for me, it's definitely evolved over time. It's a huge challenge. It's physically demanding, which I really enjoy. I love really pushing myself beyond my perceived limits so I can see, how far I can go. And to me, that's truly living. I mean, you can just kind of float through life, but I think that's a waste. I think there's just so much to experience in life that if you're not challenging yourself often, then, every day is just a waste. And, honestly, just getting away from the craziness that exists at sea level. There's so much just clutter that occurs down here. It's just, to me, it's just so amazing to just get away from that. Like I just got back from the Waddington Range up in British Columbia. It's the highest peak in British Columbia, where I was filming a movie series up there and, a reenactment of my Everest situation. And we were just immersed in it, and it's very Himalaya looking, and there wasn't anyone else for, hundreds of miles. And it was just, it's so amazing just to be there and to be away from everything else, just to gain that perspective. So when, I come back and the film crew and everyone comes back to sea level, you just have that perspective and you can just kind of like look at things a little differently. And then after time, you get, reacclimated to craziness down here, and you got to kind of get away to filter it out again.
Yeah, I'm sure it feels to you like you're back at home when you're up in those mountain ranges.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So the 7 summits, let's go into that a little bit. You wanted to, for lack of a better term, bag the 7 summits. I mean, we use that, in Colorado for bagging 14ers. It seems a little too light of a term when it comes to, the highest peaks on each continent, but, go ahead and explain to our listeners what the 7 summits is and what it is that made you want to conquer that.
Yeah. So I think when I got into climbing, I honestly didn't even have a clue what the 7 summits were, which I'm guessing is the majority of people in the audience and everyone. But yeah, I was just talking to a friend after I got into climbing, and he mentioned it, and I did some research and just realized that not many people had climbed the highest peak on the 7 continents. And it just sounds like an amazing journey. I love to travel. I love to experience different cultures, and, I love climbing. So it was just a great blend of everything. So I just decided to do that and set a goal and, to look at, as far as timelines and training and everything, just how I could make it work over the next, 7+ years.
Yeah, it's a pretty serious endeavor. So how did you start out? Was it, Kilimanjaro first, or I assume you ramped up as you went? You obviously didn't catch Everest the first time out.
No, but so since I'd been climbing here in Washington State in the Cascades, training on Mount Rainier. My first of the 7 summits was actually Denali up in Alaska. And I did that guided, and I didn't summit. We got within 1,000 feet, and just weather was really bad. So my first experience was actually, I don't know, you can call it a failure, but we all survived. So I guess it's success.
Right.
But, it is tough because it's like when you have this huge endeavor and then it's like, whoa, I didn't even stand on top of the first one I attempted. Where do we go from here? And I think it's true in life. You run into walls, you run into obstacles, and you kind of have to regroup, figure out, what the priorities are, if things are still important, and just realize that, it's not a huge deal in most cases. You take a step back and continue, then moving forward after you get some perspective. And honestly, I've climbed all of the 7 summits, stood on top of 6 of them. I've been on Denali 3 times and still have not summited. So that's the only one that's not working out for me so much. But, every time I come back, it's a good day to live, and there's reasons for turning around. And as far as I know, the mountain's still there. So I think one thing I've learned in life, through this is that it's okay to be, fulfilled, and it's okay to not stand on top of the summit, to not reach those goals, because the experience along the way is, irreplaceable. And, I have stood on top of Everest and all the other peaks, so I don't feel like I'm lacking in any way.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, you have to keep that mindset and look at it that way. You're better off walking off the peak than never coming back off again. So it's all, like you said, it's always going to be there. It's not going anywhere. So does that get to you at all, though? I mean, I got to think that, 3 attempts and still not having gotten up there, I assume you're kind of holding that out, saying eventually I'm going to get up there, or do you think that you've made your attempts and you're done with that one now?
Well, yeah, every time I come back, I say I'm never doing it again. And just like any extreme athlete, you have short-term memory, and you start looking at the pictures and the memories and everything else, and you forget about the misery,
right?
The suffering that occurs. So yeah, I never say never, but my kids are 10 and almost 13, and my son he's 10 and he loves climbing with me and just doing different adventures. So I always say there's no shortage of adventures on this earth. And what I don't want to get into is just this, cyclical, thrashing of Denali, like I just got to get back type of thing, because I think that ends up affecting more in your life negatively. But if the opportunity exists and I can get the right people to climb, because that's always important, just having a strong team. It's an amazing mountain, and it's always out there, and I do like to accomplish my goals. That's why I say never. But at this point, I don't have like a huge yearning to go back. But it's funny because my climbing Sherpa that I climbed with on Everest reached out and actually wants to climb it. So I thought that would be a cool thing to kind of reunite and climb it together. So
he wants to climb Denali.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So you guys really build a bond with your Sherpas out there. I mean, you kind of, from us, the bystanders, down here looking up at the Everest and you guys climbing it, I always think, well, it's a business for these guys. They're going up and they're guiding you or helping you up, the ascent, but you guys build more of a bond from the sounds of it with these guys than we even realize.
Yeah. Sherpa are just amazing people. And I can't speak for every climber or every situation, but for me, since I was independent, I didn't go with a guided group. I had some Sherpa support down lower, like the porters that, help carry stuff in the 38 miles on foot to base camp, and then some helping, up on the mountain, just bringing different supplies and food up to different areas. But Pasong was a climbing Sherpa that I was just basically paired with. We just climbed together the whole time. And yeah, we email often, he's on Facebook, and just an amazing person. When you're having this experience, in the death zone with someone else, it's hard not to just become a lifelong friend.
Yeah, I'm sure. So is it common for these guys, the Sherpas, to get out around the world and be able to climb other peaks themselves? Or, I mean, I being a little naive about mountaineering and, Everest and the highest peaks, I would sit here and assume, well, they pretty much are stuck there helping people climb Everest, but maybe not. Is that normal for them to be able to get out and do it in other places?
I think it depends on the individual. I mean, there's some in older school Sherpa that they kind of do the trekking deal. They're not even climbing Everest. There's so many peaks over there in the Himalaya, in Tibet, and different areas that they're just going in trekking to these different locations, and maybe some of the smaller peaks, which are still huge in comparison to other peaks around the world. But yeah, some definitely get out, and it's a small community. Like when I was down in Antarctica, I ran into a Sherpa down there. There was one in Antarctica. It was cool. So we climbed down the mountain together, and, just different mountains, like on Denali, saw another one on Rainier. And so, yeah, like Basong, the one that I was partnered with, he's definitely trying to get out and explore the world, which is great. And he's, getting his education and everything. So yeah, I think it's a blend, just like anywhere else.
It's not always possible to take a French press or a coffee maker out in the woods with you, but thankfully now you don't have to, because there is a great option in CS Instant Coffee. They make 100% Arabica instant coffee in compostable packaging. It's perfect for the outdoors or whenever you don't have the time to make a fresh pot. And right now, you can save 50% on your first order by going to csinstant.coffee and using the code ADVENTURE at checkout. One of my new favorite pieces of gear is actually my wallet, and that's because it's been inspired by Simplicity by Roam Products. It's a minimalist style wallet, holds my cash, my cards, holds it really tightly because it's elastic, and it's probably eliminated my wallet size down by 60 to 70%. They offer a variety of designs, from artistic to patterns, and they're machine washable if they get dirty. They come with a little carabiner so you can clip it to things like your keys or your lanyard. And they also offer a complete line of silicone rings with a variety of styles and colors. So if you're tired of carrying around a big bulky wallet, go to wheredoyouroam, ROAM.com, and use the code PODCAST with a capital P at checkout for 20% off.
All right, so let's talk about Everest itself. This is where the story took place. So, why don't you just start off from the beginning? You had gone and climbed some of the peaks of the 7 summits and eventually made your way to Everest. So, tell us a story about getting there and heading up and all the events that occurred after that.
Okay, yeah. So it was in April 2011. So it's a 2-month expedition. Flew over, had to say goodbye to my family for a 2-month expedition, which is never easy. It's honestly the hardest part. The climb itself is super difficult, not to downplay that, but just, with climbing, and even when I was in the military, it's like physically, most people can build up and get through anything. It's the mental aspect. So on Everest, it was no different, just the mental and emotional. So got beyond that and, took care of everything back home and, had a communication plan in place, but got over to Kathmandu, did the little tour, and then flew into Lukla, which is the shortest and most dangerous airport in the world. It's just on the side of a mountain. And then from there, it's 38 miles on foot. So just, a week and a half hiking into base camp, and base camp's at 17,500 feet. So you're acclimating just to get to base camp. And then the first thing I did is, pretty much dropped our gear. A day later, hiked, I think it was like 20 miles out to Island Peak, which is a 20,000 foot peak, and climbed that to acclimate. So basically, acclimation is to help your body adapt at the higher altitudes, because on Mount Everest at 29,035 feet, it's the same altitude that major jet airliners fly at. So if you were to pluck your body from where you or I are at right now, put you on the summit, you would pass out and die. You just can't survive up there. There's only a third of the air. So the acclimatization process actually forces you to, get up in the higher altitudes and you come back down. So we basically call it rotations. You go up, touch a camp, come back down, rest for a few days, and your body will produce red blood cells, which carry more oxygen. So you just continue just going up and down the mountain multiple times. I think you climb the mountain like 5 times before it's all over. And after about a month, you're in position to actually make a summit attempt. So as high as you'll go is Camp 3, which is basically up Lhotse face. Lhotse is the 4th highest mountain in the world. So you basically climb up that and then cut over to get to the highest camp in the world on Everest. And, it's a long process. But when you're there and you're acclimated, it's amazing. It's just amazing to see how the body responds and how you can just survive in those altitudes. So just kind of jumping a month into it, when I was fully acclimated, I went all the way back down to base camp and waited for a weather window, and it was a few days. And basically you need a 5-day weather window, which on Everest, there's only a couple different days that you can actually summit because it's so high up in the jet stream that it kind of creates its own weather pattern. And, got the window. So started heading up the mountain, bypassed Camp 1, went through the Khumbu ice fall. That's where the huge building size blocks of ice are and all the ladders. Same area where, 16 Sherpa were killed a few years back when a massive piece of ice calved off and crushed them all. Got up to Camp 2 and then, the next day headed up to, actually I rested one day there and then the next day headed up to Camp 3. And from there, it was just myself and Pasong. And early in the morning, we took off and we were heading up Lhotse face, which is just a straight up, just imagine miles of just straight up a wall of ice. And there's fixed lines, so there's ropes where I have all my gear on, crampons, spikes on my boots, harness with multiple devices that are attached to that rope, which is attached to anchor points that Sherpa and guides and people will attach to the mountain so that you don't have to be like roped to another person. You're basically roped to the mountain. So if you fall, you only fall to the next anchor. So I'm hiking up from Camp 3, trying to get up to the high camp and then would go for the summit later. And about 1,000 feet above Camp 3, I stopped to get some water and I had a supplemental oxygen mask on. And so basically a mask, which has a strap that goes over the forehead and then goggles. In order to drink, I have to take all that gear off. So I'm sitting, just imagine the side of a wall and I'm anchored off to that. And I take my goggles off, put it around my arm, and then take my mask off, and my foot slipped out. And I went to reach for the rope that I was attached to. It was just a natural reaction, and my goggles actually slid off my arm and slid down the mountain. And I figured they were gone. And, it's so bright up there, and it's just really, really dangerous to not have your eyes protected. And I figured if I didn't have my goggles, I was pretty much done. I had sunglasses, but with the oxygen mask, you can't really wear glasses because it pushes your glasses out too far and you'd get snowblind underneath. But some Sherpa down below, about 500 feet below, were waving at me. They actually said, they're letting me know, they're gesturing that they got my goggles.
Wow.
Yeah.
What are the odds?
Was just a miracle in itself. So I came off oxygen. I anchored my pack and everything to the line right there, the anchor, and I rappelled down. But when I got to them, they were cracked. And goggles have 2 lenses, an internal and external. The internal was cracked. So, without really thinking too much about it, I put them on and started climbing back up. And goggles will freeze and fog and freeze anyways, just because the contrast of your hot breath and the cold outside. Well, mine were freezing between layers. So I ended up wearing them, got back to my pack, made it up to high camp, and just could barely see getting up there. and it was really windy. There was 70-mile-an-hour gusts hitting us. Most people didn't summit that day. A couple people did, but in fact, a Japanese climber actually died that day on the summit, near the summit. So I ended up, in the early afternoon getting to high camp, and Pasong was already there. He was in the tent. I showed him my goggles, they're cracked, and I ended up just ripping that internal lens out, not realizing at the time that would cut their effectiveness in half. So we laid there in the tent, the winds were whipping, and, we made some radio calls down to see how the weather was going to be if we can make a summit attempt, because we're now at 26,000 feet. We're in the death zone, and they call it that because there's only a third of the air. You just cannot survive long up there. Like if you cut your finger, it won't heal. It's an insane place. Just not many places, only 14 other places like it on this earth. And the weather was looking good. It was going to be calm through the night. And then the next day, like 50-mile-an-hour gusts were going to come. But by that time, we should have been able to get to the summit and down. So about 8, 9 o'clock that night, we got all prepared and we started heading out. And we made our way across the ice bulge, like a 1/4-mile ice bulge, and then started heading up to the top. And Pasong started like kind of inching away. He was just slowing down, and I continued moving. I got to the halfway point. It's called the balcony at 27,500 feet, and I waited for about an hour for Pasong, and he finally showed up, and he wasn't feeling good. In fact, he threw up, and I figured, okay, then we're probably going to head back. And he assured me he was fine. He wanted to continue, so we continued, and not far from there, about 28,000 feet, he finally said he was done. And, strong guy, he already had a couple summits under his belt. But he's just, it's Everest, it's the death zone. And, you live and die based on decisions. So we were kind of at that point. He's going to go back. He actually said he was going to wait at the balcony. And, I'm weighing out things like, how am I feeling? I'm strong. How's the weather? Weather was good. But most importantly, how was Pasong? And he, again, assured me he was fine. He was going to wait right there and gave me an extra oxygen bottle, buried it right in the snow right there. And, said, go to the top and I'll meet you back at the balcony. And he ended up going all the way back down to high camp. I wouldn't know that till later. And that's fine. Again, it's in the death zone. You got to do what you do to survive. So I continued up and, climbed up the South Rock Step, which is a rock climb, above 28,000 feet. So a lot of effort, but got to the top of that, and that's when the sun was rising. And, I'm hanging out at like 28,000 feet. It was such an amazing moment. I got video of the sun basically rising behind Everest, casting this perfect pyramid shadow down over the Himalayas. It's just one of those moments that just never, ever forget. And, continued up, got to the south summit, went across the Cornice Traverse, which is an area which is a 2-mile drop on each side of you, like 2 miles straight down. It's like 2 feet wide, but on the right side, it's 2 miles straight into Tibet, and on the left, 2 miles straight down into Nepal. So it's a pretty unforgiving area. Got to Hillary Step, which is the last major obstacle. It's a 40-foot rock climb. Just kind of bounced over that, and then I could see the true summit. And just those last moments, just taking those steps towards the summit is just, it's so much to process in the moment, because you worked so hard to get there, and then to finally be there and just to have that realization, that you are on the top of the world and the only person there, completely alone. So I, just took it all in, took some pictures, took the highest selfie in the world, and then made a radio call down and just let everyone know that I was there. And they were, cheering, and a guy that was down at Camp 3 moving to the high camp that day, got on and congratulated me and, basically said, be careful on the way down. And, actually said, you and Pasong, be careful. And that was my first indication that no one realized I was alone. So I let him know, like, well, Pasong went down like an hour ago. And he's like, oh, you're alone? He's like, well, be careful. I'm like, okay. So I sat down, got a snack, got some water, and You know, you spend a month or so getting to that point, and you can spend less than an hour taking it all in. And I gathered all my stuff and started moving down. And about 10, 15 feet into it, everything just went completely white. And at that moment, I dropped to my knees and grabbed the rope that I was attached to and just realized what had happened. I went snowblind. And with snowblindness, like when it happens, it happens, and everything is just bright white and very painful. Like if you broke chips, like potato chips in your eyelids, it's just scratching in there, and it's so bright. It'd be like if you put a light bulb within an inch of your face, you can't see anything. You could put your finger in front of that light bulb and you'd know something moved, but you just cannot see anything.
Wow.
And, without overthinking it, without panicking, in the military, that's one thing they drilled into the job that we had is you panic, you die. And I think a lot of that just came back. I stood up and just started moving, just slowly, one step in front of the other, just very deliberate steps, very slowly, just holding onto that rope so tight and, using my other senses, but really trying to use my eyes. I'm not normally blind, and they just weren't working. And it was very frustrating. And it was very painful. I just kept moving, and I don't know. I felt this presence around me the whole time. Like I never felt alone. But I didn't really think too much about it. I don't know. I just never felt alone. And I just, kept moving, and I would be so thirsty. I would just have to stop and find my water, drink my water, and then put it back. And it's just this long process. And, made it to the top of Hillary Step, basically just kind of pendulum down that thing, and, just so lucky I didn't like break a leg or anything coming down. I just kind of slid down very ungracefully, got across that Cornice Traverse, the 2-mile drop on each side area. Winds were kicking up. I could hear them. They would come up over the ridge, and I would just hunker down and let it pass over me. And then I'd get up, take another step, and it was just this long process. Got to the south summit and lost a crampon there. Thing popped off, and I took a major fall down that, where the rope actually shock loaded. And honestly, the whole way down, that was the most scary part of it, where I was just falling uncontrollably, just could not see anything. And then that rope just shock loaded. My mask was ripped from my face. My heart was just racing out of my chest. And, I righted myself, grabbed my oxygen, took some deep breaths, and saw this blurry object, a little bit above me where I'd fallen. And I remember just crawling up to it, and it was my crampon. It's like miracle number 2 at this point.
Holy cow.
Like counting my miracles. And I remember just reaching that and just, cutting out a little shelf and getting it back on and just cinching down both of them. And I stepped to my right, which would be back towards the rock, the South Rock step, to try to come down the rock instead of the snow. And the earth just kind of came out from under me, just a slab avalanche. It was getting warmer out. And I just remember I was falling, and I remember that initial just falling feeling, and I grabbed the rope so fast and so tight, it burned a line right through my glove. And I remember that pain I felt on my palm, but just my heart was just racing again, and just like holding on to that rope and just calming myself down again. So I got over to the South Rock step and, slid down, got to the snowy area, pretty close to where Pasong had left. I remember being happy to be at that place because it was, snow, just making my way back to the balcony and then down to the South Col, the high camp. And I almost walked right past the oxygen bottle. This is like this bright orange, fiery glow. And I remember just laying down next to it and fumbling with my regulator and getting it on there, getting it off of my bottle and onto that one. But no air was coming out of it. And I knew that mine wasn't going to last much longer. And I tried for a little bit, but it just wouldn't work. And I don't know why, but I put that extra 15 pounds, that other bottle, in my pack, reattached mine and put the other one in my pack and just started moving. It's the death zone. So you're just kind of like, not thinking clearly. And at this point, I'd been climbing for over 30 hours from the day prior to this point. Got to the balcony, and Pasong wasn't there, and I just assumed he must have went down. And, I got a snack and just kind of got my gear ready to head down that last, halfway to get to the high camp. And about 20 yards into it, my mask just starts sucking into my face. And I remember just dropping to my knees and just ripping my mask off and just trying to breathe the thin air. And, I just, at that moment, I just gave up, just surrendered, just prayed, just said, God, I can't do this alone. Please help me. And, almost immediately, I felt this energy come over my body, and, I just felt lifted to my feet. And the first thing I did was try that other bottle. I grabbed my regulator and was just fumbling. And as soon as I attached it, there was a positive flow. And I remember just taking like 5 deep breaths of air, and it burned. It was like fire entering my veins and my body, but it gave me life. And without overthinking it, I placed everything, my bottle and everything, back in the pack, and just, as fast and safe as I could, just started going down the mountain. It was like 20 pitches of rappelling. And, eventually, it should have taken me 3 hours to get to high camp. This would have been about 7 hours later. People down below thought the worst had happened, and I come stumbling in, and, I'm about a quarter mile from where the tents are, and out of nowhere, Pasong hugs me. He's like, Brian, you alive? And at that moment, I knew I was alive and never saw him coming. He just hugs me, and then we turn, and he helps me get me back to camp. And, I collapsed in the tent, and I basically fell asleep for 15 hours. My eyes were glued shut, and it was even more painful the next day. And, but I had Pasong, and, we still had to get down. We still had to get down Lhotse Face, get down to Camp 2, and the next day get through the Khumbu Icefall, across the ladders, and get to base camp. And then, 2 days to get the 38 miles out to Lukla to fly to Kathmandu and back home.
Wow, so you actually hiked down back out. You didn't get down to camp and fly out at that point. You still had a lot of hiking to do.
Yeah. Yeah, my eyesight didn't come back for about a month and a half. So my right eye was coming back a few days later, but my left was completely blurry and, slowly coming back, but wasn't fully back for about a month and a half.
Wow, that's incredible. So Pasong probably just thought the worst, that you had died on the mountain. He was probably, I'm sure he was pretty torn up, the fact that he had to go back down and left you up there, huh?
Yeah, and that's something he said. He's like, I'm so sorry I leave you. And that surprised me because, he's such a great guy. But it was, it's a discussion that we had. And, you make those decisions on a mountain. And at the time, it made sense. He was going to wait right there. I felt good, and, we had that conversation. But yeah, I mean, it would be horrible, if something happened to him or anything. So you go through life and you make these decisions, and fortunately sometimes they work out. And yeah, we're definitely closer because of it. But yeah, it was definitely nice to have him there, and when he just hugged me out of nowhere, it's like, wow.
I'm sure. Well, it's amazing we can take something like a pair of goggles for granted like that. You just don't think much about it. You just think, I'm going to have my goggles, and it's not like you're carrying extra sets of everything with you. You can't do that, obviously. So something as simple as a pair of goggles can cause all this turmoil. Yeah,
and it's interesting because I speak a lot and do media and everything else, so I always get the common questions. And it's true. I mean, you go to any guiding company, go to their equipment list, it's one pair of goggles. And typically I don't even wear goggles. I wear sunglasses. They wrap around better. They're more comfortable. Because of my experience, I do bring extra goggles.
I'm sure.
On certain, but the reasoning it's a little different, because even in my situation, I don't know if I would have been swapping out goggles necessarily. I may not have rappelled down to get the others. I would have had a separate set, but I didn't realize that they were, by ripping the internal lens, that it would have caused that. And, just being off, exposing, especially I have blue eyes, so I'm more susceptible to snow blindness, on Everest, every bit adds up. So anytime that I was, taking my goggles or glasses off, it was all adding up. So it was just kind of like the perfect storm. When I was in Antarctica later that year and on Denali the next couple times, I will bring extra goggles, but a lot of times it's because when one freezes, I'll swap it out and use the other pair, so I can warm one pair while the other's freezing. So it's kind of for a different reason.
Right.
But definitely I'm very much aware of snow blindness. So I'm very keen to it. And when I bring people up, even on Rainier, I brought some former Navy guys up on a little expedition this summer. And, I'm like, I don't know, now I'm like the grandpa, like, hey, you better watch your eyes because
put your glasses on.
Yeah.
So did you know is snow blindness when it happened? Were you trained to recognize that?
Yeah, I'm aware of things that can happen on the mountain. In fact, when I was heading up to high camp earlier, the day prior, there was a guy that was snowblind that was being helped down the mountain. So it was kind of ironic. It's kind of, I was looking at him going, oh man, that's horrible. I'd hate to be that guy. And then, hours later, I was that guy. So it's definitely aware. But with snow blindness, I mean, there was no reversing it. Usually it takes on average 24 hours to get over it. Mine was just very extreme.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. When I first heard about your story, I assumed it was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, which can cause blindness. So you just think altitude, lack of oxygen, that can be a common problem. So when I found out it was snow blindness and that snow blindness, yours lasted, a month and a half. Man, that's kind of worse in a way because it lasts so long, at least with, as long as, you don't pass out or die from the edema, you can actually back down off the mountain some and get down to a lower altitude and have it reverse the effects. But you had to deal with this lack of vision for a month and a half.
Yeah. I definitely don't recommend it.
I can't imagine. So you hike down, you finally fly out. Did you go straight back to Washington at that point, I assume, and obviously seek medical treatment and meet up with your wife?
Yeah, man, I was so beat up looking. I mean, I lost 20 pounds. I had 2 black eyes, couldn't see anything, and I'm flying home alone. So I had to fly to Bangkok, get a hotel, and I'm stumbling around, Bangkok, just bumping into people, and it was a mess. But yeah, the next day flew to Taiwan and then to Seattle, and the plane was delayed, so I didn't get to see my kids. They were in bed, and my wife was at the airport. And so pretty much the next day, I think Fox News was in my house, and had bright lights and cameras and everything else going on. So that sucked. But
the last thing you want is bright lights in your face.
Oh my goodness, yeah. It's like this. I was on stage at my church and everything, telling my story, but but then I went to the doctor and, they just said it wouldn't be permanent and don't drive. And, it's just normal stuff. It just took time.
It had to be a sweet reunion with your wife at that point for the both of you. I mean, have all this occur on Everest and, not the worst that could happen, but still pretty bad. It's got to be a scary moment and a sweet reunion. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, just a survival moment for sure. Just puts things in perspective, and then to see the kids too. And, it's when I climb, I take calculated risks, and, I haven't had any situations that have been, bad. I mean, a lot of people die on mountains, and, I've had a lot of success, and, I think try to be smart and, basically working on avoidance, avalanche avoidance, everything else. If it's your time, it's your time. But this is definitely a scenario that, gets you thinking. And, obviously there's the mass majority of people on this earth would never climb Everest or even climb in general. So they're not going to understand. They're just going to see the, one perspective of it. But for those that are closer to these type of extreme adventures, they get it and they understand. And, when you do train and you are there and, you are wired a certain way that, you're good at doing these type of things, and you try to avoid, going snowblind or anything else, but stuff happens, and it did. And fortunately, I was here to tell the story, and to, now cherish those moments with the family that much more, and just be a better person because of it and help others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a gift in and of itself. Well, adventures don't have to be dangerous. They can be safe. You can be trained, and you can be safe about it. And yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people don't understand that. They see the word adventure as extreme sport, taking a risk with your life, and it's not necessarily the case. Obviously, you're taking more risk, but you've had a lot of training in your life to learn how to deal with it too, and make smart decisions for sure.
Yep.
All right. So you wrote a book about this. That's how I found you. So the book is called Blind Descent, Surviving Alone and Blind on Mount Everest. Tell me a little bit about the book and where people can find it.
Yeah. So when I got back, I connected with a literary agent, working title agencies in Tennessee, near the Nashville area. And they connected me with Tyndale House Publishing, and then went through the process of writing a book. I actually had most of it because Climbing Magazine was doing a blog on me my entire journey. So I was just able to kind of transform that into a book, and then the editors turned it into, better than a fifth grader writing. And so I was happy with how that turned out. But yeah, it's called Blind Descent. It's on Amazon, or anywhere you can buy books. There's just released an audio version of it this year as well. But it's on all flavors of books that you can get: hard, soft, ebooks, Kindles, audio, and then I'm on all flavors of social media as well. Okay, probably do more tweeting than anything, but I try to, always capture all of the pictures and adventures that I take, and just bring people along for the journey, because most people would never step foot on some of the places that I'm fortunate to go to. Yeah,
it definitely allows people to live vicariously. I was looking at your Instagram account, and you have some amazing footage and photos in there. If people want to go check out Brian's Instagram, it's at Brian C. Dickinson. In fact, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they're all under that same handle. So check him out there. What I saw was video clips from the film shoot that you're doing up in Canada. So are you allowed to tell us a little bit about why you're up there?
Yeah. So I will be a feature in, it's a 10 disc series. It's actually a marriage series that Kingdom Works Studios putting out. It should be in spring of 2017. So mine will be a feature of one of the DVDs, and they're using my experience to help marriages, apparently. So it should.
You get mad at your husband? Send him to Everest.
Something. Yeah, it'll be interesting. No, they've definitely produced some quality stuff. So the shoot itself was very. It was an experience. I mean, we had to helicopter up to the Waddington Range there, and basically just lived up in the mountains, and just had all the film equipment, the producer and director, and just basically anchoring them down to keep them safe while I was, reenacting a lot of, what I went through. It's actually very emotional to go just back, mentally to that place and have to do it, and then do multiple takes on it. So it should turn out pretty good. I'm, excited to see how it turns out. But yeah, I'll definitely be posting more through social media as I learn more about it.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I imagine people can follow you and find out when that gets released as well. So, well, I can't wait to read the book. I'm definitely gonna pick it up. I'm fascinated with your story, and obviously happy that you came back to us to be able to tell it. It was just an amazing recount of an amazing journey that you had. So, thank you very much for spending the time and telling our listeners about it, and hopefully they'll go out and follow you and check out the book as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, my pleasure. And we will put all the links up under the show notes to your website and to the book. In fact, we have a ASP bookshelf that we use to put all of our authors' books in there. So if you guys want to go find Brian's book, so check out our ASP bookshelf, and you can find it in there. And I think that'll do it, Brian. Thanks so much for joining me.
All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to the show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.